April 2nd, called to order. Please rise for the pledge if you're able. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll.
Councilmember Cooper?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Beaton?
Here.
Mayor Zelinski?
Here.
Councilmember Schmansky?
Here.
Councilmember Grabowski?
Here.
City Manager?
Here.
City Attorney?
Here.
DPW Director?
Here.
Finance Director?
Here.
City Engineer?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Public hearings, we have none. Citizens' comments on agenda-related items. Do we have any citizens like to comment on agenda-related items? Please state your name and address and limit your comments to 5 minutes, please.
Barry Lind, 532 4th Street. I've actually got two agenda items that I'd like to make some comments on this evening. The first being the, let me see, under new business item D, consideration of executive officer appointment for the Manistee Downtown Development Authority. So a couple of comments I have on that agenda item. In reading the agenda item, it sounds like the intent is for this evening for the council to make that appointment or possible change. In looking at a couple of documents, what I've seen is a couple things that I want to bring to your attention. The first, in the memo from the city manager to council on this topic, it talks about the new Public Act 57 of 2018, which basically significantly changed a lot about TIF organizations, including DDAs. In that memo, it talks about now the definition of chief executive officer is mayor or city manager of a city. In my research, that is actually not a change. That actually is the wording in the original 1975 state statute. So this isn't a change that is coming about as a result of the new TIF acts. It's always been there. So then I want to point to the Chapter 282 of the Codified Ordinances of the city, which is the chapter that the DDA is essentially created under. And in 282.02, that particular city ordinance defines chief executive officer as the mayor. Now, since, at least in my reading of this, this original ordinance was passed in '85, about a decade after the state statute. If the state statute allowed for either, and this language is specific to mayor, that would imply to me that at that time, true, that was 35 years ago, that council at that time intended for it to be the mayor, not for it to be either or. Now, clearly it is within the right of this council to change that. Because this is an ordinance, though, I believe it needs to go through the ordinance process and would require an ordinance change for you to make that change that you're contemplating tonight. My recommendation, would be to change the ordinance. The DDA bylaws also need a change that corresponds to this to basically allow either mayor or city manager. And then once those ordinance changes are in place, to then make that decision. So that's my comments on that topic. The other topic I'd like to talk about is the proposed special events policy. And I know this council has struggled with this for probably a year and a half, if not longer. And the only question or concern I have is not with all of the nonprofit and all of those things. My concern is with for-profit. I'm concerned that the language here is very vague. It basically just says the cost to for-profits is the true cost of city services. When would that be determined? How would that be determined? Because if I was a for-profit, I would look at this and say, there's no way
1
I'm gonna
minute.
go down this process because I don't know what it's gonna cost. In the special event request form, which is part of this policy, I think this is the form that has been used for like the last year to gather information. And again, it's vague. It talks about example of fees. It doesn't say these would actually be the fees. And also it has a line in there that talks about applying a discount of 25 up to 75%. There's nothing in this that talks about a discount, so I'm not sure why that line is there. So those are just some concerns I have on that policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? None? Consent agenda. All items marked with an asterisk on the consent agenda and considered by the city manager to be routine matters. Prior to approval of the consent agenda, any member of council may have an item from the consent agenda removed and taken up during the regular portion of the meeting. Consent agenda items include approval of minutes, cash balance, revenue and expenses, notification regarding next work session, and consideration of the annual tightline for troops event. At this time, council could take action to approve the consent agenda as presented. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion, we approve.
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please take the roll.
Councilmember Grabowski,
Yes.
Councilmember Szymanski,
Yes.
Mayor Zelinski,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Beaton,
Yes.
Councilmember Cooper.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you. Unfinished business, we have none. New business. Consideration of compensation commission recommendation for council salaries. We already did that under the consent agenda. Yep, that's all right. Compensation for the mayor and members of city council is established based on procedures in the chapter, or the charter, state statute, and local ordinance. A fundamental point in these requirements is that the mayor and council may not approve changes in their own level of compensation. Any change in the compensation must take effect after the term of all current council members have expired. Under established procedure, the city council may not develop compensation rates even though the rates do not become effective during the term of the city council. Rates are developed by an independent compensation commission, which only meets every other year. The council may accept or reject the compensation commission recommendation. They may not be modified. If council rejects a recommendation, they are returned to the compensation commission for further consideration. Rejection can only occur if a majority of council, 5 members, vote to reject the recommendation. If the recommendations are accepted, they will be implemented at the beginning of the year 2021 after all current council terms have expired. The current salary for mayor and city council are $4,774 and $3,713 per year respectively. These rates have been in effect since January 2009. The Compensation Commission is recommending that these amounts be increased to $5,000 for mayor and $3,875 for council. At this time, council could take action to accept or reject the Compensation Commission recommendation. Do I have a motion to either accept or reject?
I make a motion that we reject the recommendation.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, please take the roll.
Councilmember Grabowski,
Yes.
Councilmember Szymanski,
Yes.
Mayor Zelinski,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Beaton,
Yes.
Councilmember Cooper.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you. Consideration of recognizing the Manistee Saints Baseball Club as a nonprofit organization. The Manistee Saints Baseball Club is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. They are applying for a raffle license through the Michigan Lottery Charitable Gaming Division for a raffle as part of their 85th, congratulations, birthday celebration at Reach Park this summer. Prior to the state of Michigan issuing a license, the Manistee Saints Baseball Club must qualify as a local nonprofit organization through recognition by the Manistee City Council. At this time, council could take action to recognize the Manistee Saints Baseball Club as a local nonprofit organization for the purpose of applying for a charitable gaming license through the state of Michigan. Do I have a motion?
Yes, I'd like to make that motion to recognize the Manistee Saints Baseball Club as a local nonprofit organization for the purpose of applying for a charitable gaming license through the state of Michigan.
I'll second.
I have a first and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, please take the roll.
Mayor Zelinski?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Beaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Cooper?
Yes.
Councilmember Grabowski?
Yes.
Councilmember Smansky?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you. Consideration of special event policy CP-39. Special event policy CP-39 stipulates the fees for city services used to support parades and special events sponsored by for-profit and nonprofit organizations. At this time, council could take action to approve council policy 39 special events. Do I have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second. Do I have any discussion? Seeing none, please take the roll.
Councilmember Smansky?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Beaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Cooper?
Yes.
Councilmember Grabowski?
Yes.
Mayor Zelinski?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Consideration of chief executive officer appointed to the Downtown Development Authority Board. Part 2 of Public Act 57, Recodified Tax Increment Financing Act, defines the chief executive officer as the mayor or city manager. Also, the act stipulates that the chief executive officer is a member of the Downtown Development Authority, DDA Board. At this time, council could take action to continue to have the mayor serve on the Downtown Development Authority Board or appoint the city manager instead of the mayor.
I would like to make the motion to have the mayor appoint the city manager instead of the mayor to the Downtown Development Authority Board.
I would like to support that motion.
Was it motion for the manager to appoint or the,
The council is to appoint.
Oh,
Right.
right?
I thought
I think she said the mayor would appoint you as the mayor.
I'm sorry, then I said that wrong.
I don't
I
think
would
that's
like
what
to
she meant.
retract
No.
that.
That is part of the law. If they consider me the executive officer, I could do that, but
Right.
Yeah, that's, I would like the council to appoint the city manager to the Downtown Development Authority Board instead of the mayor.
so I had a motion and a second.
And I'll second that, yep.
Do I have any discussion?
I've got a,
Oh, go ahead.
I've got a question to check on the legality. Mr. Lynn had mentioned the fact that there was a conflict with the ordinance.
Yep.
What-
Yeah, if council,
us doing this?
no, if council approves the change in who's appointed to the DDA board, we would have to amend the city ordinance. We'd also have to revise our bylaws.
Okay.
That wasn't done in advance, not knowing which way the council wanted to go.
And it's also my understanding, the Home Rule Act also plays a part in how they charter, what the charter states and that type of thing. Is that true?
Yes, the Home Rule City Act does govern the city of Manistee and the charter provisions that it has, correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other discussion?
I think this is a wise move on behalf of the council. A mayor is elected every year in November, or re-elected if he's so lucky. So I think it's best to have some continuity on the DDA board, somebody who can pick up the phone, react quickly to situations, rather than having it go through the mayor and having it go through the city manager. You can get more communication, and I think things will be accomplished much faster that way.
I just have a quick comment that the city manager is in a better position. He manages the day-to-day operation of the city. He's more in tune to make decisions that best serve the taxpayers of the city of Manistee. Any other discussion? Seeing none, please take the roll.
Mayor Pro Tem Beaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Cooper,
Yes.
Councilmember Grabowski,
Yes.
Councilmember Smansky,
Yes.
Mayor Zelinski.
Yes,
Motion passed.
thank you. Consideration of a grant application for Manistee North Pier Head Light Deck and Hatch Interior Restoration Project. Whoa. The Manistee County Historical Museum wishes to submit a grant request in the amount of $27,200, $16,300 from the grant funds, and $10,900 from the museum. The grant stipulates that the city must be a joint applicant. However, no city funds are requested for this project. In addition, the grant requires the city to approve the resolution of support and attest that no federal or state historical preservation tax incentives have been or will be taken up for this proposed work. At this time, council could take action to authorize the city manager to sign the grant application on behalf of the city, authorize the mayor to sign the required resolution, and the tax incentive certification form. Do I have a motion?
I'll make that. Go ahead, Tim.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, please take the roll.
Councilmember Cooper,
Yes.
Councilmember Grabowski,
Yes.
Councilmember Smansky,
Yes.
Mayor Zelinski,
Yes,
Mayor Pro Tem Eaton.
Yes.
Motion passed.
thank you. Notices and communications. This meeting, we have a report from the Housing Commission. At this time, Mr. Clinton McKevin Corpus will report on activities of the Manistee Housing Commission and respond to any questions council may have regarding their activities. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Thank you. Distributed to you all a copy of the report. I'm not going to read it to all of us. Just going to kind of highlight it. And for those in the audience, there's in the back, if people would like. My report this year is going to be focused on what we're doing to secure our future. I've mentioned in the past our investigation of the program of HUD called the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. And what that does is allows housing commissions to change, public housing authorities to change from being subsidized by the federal government through operating subsidy to having unit-based vouchers. That then turns the property over to the housing authority and allows for leveraging that we can't do right now to be able then to get the financing, like tax credits through MISHDA and stuff, to be able to do some changes and improve our properties. This came about in 2012 with a recognition that there was a huge backlog nationally of disrepair and neglect because of lack of funding from Congress to the public housing authorities across the nation. Currently, it's estimated that that backlog is at about $26 billion. So we haven't escaped that either. We have seen a drastic decrease in funding that allows us to modernize and repair our properties. And so we began looking into the program. We set some goals as we began to look into it. We wanted to be sure that the redevelopment costs were reasonable and that we would be able to continue to provide affordable and decent housing to our community that met the people who are living at 50% or 30% of the area median income, so the poorest of the poor. And this program, meets that. We also wanted to have something that ensured that this type of rental facility was permanently within our community. Sometimes properties will get tax incentives and other programs to support them, and then after so many years, those reductions and subsidies, the owner can get rid of them, buy them out, change them over, be different. We wanted to be sure, as the public housing authority in the community, that didn't happen. RAD ensures, because we have to agree to a 20-year agreement for the properties and a subsequent guarantee of additional 20 years of continuation of having the properties remain at 50% and 30% of AMI. So the program basically ensures for the community a future of at least 40 years that this type of housing will be available in the community. It ensures that our residents continue to pay no more than 30% of their adjusted gross income. That includes their utilities. And it ensures the financial stability of the housing authority for the long term, for the future. And it provides us for the opportunity to redevelop our properties and provide new and long-term housing that we don't continually have major breakdowns with. RAD fit the principles that the commissioners and I had discussed, and we have been accepted into that program. And the RAD program, I should mention, is highly encouraged from Secretary Carson right on down the chain. And in fact, we receive monthly phone calls from the field office to be sure that we're continuing in the process because they want public housing authorities to move into this program. We've assembled a team to help direct us in this because it involves major federal regulations and laws, and to be sure that we're able to meet those requirements. We did an engagement with a firm called EJP Consulting Group. It's a nationally known firm that has a very long track record. In fact, they wrote many of the regulations involved in the RAD program and are highly recognized by HUD for doing this, and they provide seminars to HUD employees on implementation of this. We then did a RFP for legal counsel to oversee the legal requirements of changing the public housing properties over to project-based vouchers and to meet all the legal requirements there. And the selection process brought in Reno and Kavanaugh, another nationally known firm that deals with public housing and governmental authorities. And then most recently, at the last Housing Commission meeting, we selected our developer to assist and round out our team, and I'm pleased to announce that we have selected Hollander Development Corporation to be our developer. So the project team consists of the Housing Commission commissioners, myself. EJP is the umbrella organization managing it all for us, Reno and Kavanaugh, and Hollander Development Corporation. Our next steps is to prepare for, our project team to prepare for phase one. Phase one is the redevelopment of all of our scattered site housing. And most easily come to mind the Reeds Park area, and we have some 112th and scattered throughout the city. All of our scattered site family homes we've taken care of in phase one. And we need to provide a submission to MISTA for the 9% tax credits to assist with the funding. We also will be holding meetings with the residents of the scattered sites, family units, to involve them in the development of what the properties will look like, what the buildings, the homes will look like, what are the things that are necessary for them, and get their vision involved in that. We hope to begin early mid-2020 on actually doing some building and reconstruction of this. So we got a lot of work cut out for us and going ahead. Has there been major decisions that this is how it's going to happen and this is what will be? Other than the regulations of what we have to follow and do, no. The project team, we're going to meet and establish the criteria that's set up by MISTA for the 9% tax credits and be sure that our development plans meet that. We're going to get the input of the residents that live in the scattered sites, and we're going to ensure that if the people that are living in our current units have to be relocated during redevelopment and rebuilding, RAD pays for them living in a different site, us finding a different place for them to live. And so we have to be sure that works smoothly. And the plan overall has to be approved by Fair Housing. Even before anything can really happen, HUD's Fair Housing has to approve it. And then finally, it has to be approved by the RAD HUD team. We'll keep everyone informed as we move forward, but it's an exciting time for the commissioners and I. We have been working for quite a long time to find a way to do major changes, to upgrade, to redevelop and provide solid, good housing for the residents of our community that fit the eligibility requirements, and for the long term, not just a Band-Aid here and a Band-Aid there that we have been doing. So I wanted to share that excitement with you, and we'll keep you informed and let you know where things are moving. Entertain any questions you might have at this time.
I have a couple. During this process, did you do a pro and con analysis? And if so, what are the cons to this? Obviously, nothing is a panacea. There's got to be something that you're giving up to go from one side to the other. So what would you consider to be the con side of going to this instead of where we're at right now?
You have sort of the list on page 2 at the bottom, what our principles were about the pros.
Mm-hmm.
The cons, there's one. Congress is cutting funding. That's it. HUD is moving in the direction of eliminating capital fund and operational support and moving everything over to voucher support. We cannot exist. And the recent government shutdown, with what was publicized in the paper and the things that we brought forth, showed we cannot exist and operate currently without that support. So that's the con. We do it, we die.
The other question I have is, under this proposal with the RAD, how will there be a separation so that our seniors that are currently being taken care of under housing will feel comfortable that they have an environment that is age appropriate?
Phase 1 deals with our scattered sites. HUD sees those as general population. So we'll be dealing with that general population only in phase 1. When we get to phase 2, we'll be working with Century Terrace and Harborview. That is part of the fair housing that has to go through. Fair housing will make the determination if we are meeting those needs for now and into the future, and how many units need to be disabled, how many units need to be 55 to 61 and a half, and how many need to be above that as seniors. And they'll make the determination if we are following the law and that people are insured on that. That's all I can really state at this time, because there's more than our hands in guiding it. It's a lot of oversight now from the government.
So is there a possibility that we would have mixed populations again, where we would have our seniors mixed in with young families and other age groups in the housing areas?
Most likely,
Similar to what?
most likely not, but I do want to clarify on that position. Currently at Century Terrace and Harborview, we have near elderly and disabled. We have elderly in both of the buildings that are guardians of their grandchildren. They live there. Kids live there because the eligible parties, grandparents, are residents. We have disabled people who have babies. They live there eligibly, okay? So it's important to be careful on how we look at and discuss the age appropriateness of people living together, because we don't know the individual family makeup and situation. And the law provides that I, as a grandparent, am guardian of my 14-year-old. I am 57. I'm eligible for Century Terrace or Harborview. She would live there.
Or maybe I'm mistaken, but I thought we had an issue where we had other
We
families.
did. And
That's really what I'm getting at, is to make sure.
that was taken care of. Yeah, that was taken care of.
Okay.
But I also need to emphasize, HUD is in so much flux right now that, a new directive came out last week about how to process the RAD things. And it changes our agency size to a quicker route than the original RAD program. And we're not sure of all the impacts that has yet. HUD regulation, federal regulation oversees that. They could come in and they could say, it's gonna be general population. And, then we have to begin a battle once again to change that. My hope is not to have to do that. I made that plain with the field office from the beginning, that was the intention, and that's where we want to stay. And they've promised to support it as much as they can until their superiors direct them otherwise. So, you have my promise of keeping it that way as much as I can and under my ability to do so.
I have a question. You may not know the answer. I just look at this project being a huge project, and my understanding is if you're going to Century Terrace, you're going to have to move all those people out and put them someplace. Now, are you going to build a building first and then move them into that new building? And if you're going to build a building first, where would you put it?
Well, as we began moving down this road, I realized that this is an elephant, and I decided to take it one bite at a time. Okay. Our project team has division of responsibilities, and one of the divisions of responsibilities under our developer is to make that determination and make it happen and make it match the law. Okay, so that's one of the things Hollander Development Corporation has to work with. I can't envision 119 units if we had to move them all out, to redevelop that building, where to move them to.
That's what I'm saying. I think you're going to have to build a building first, right, to move them into?
Fill up all the hotels.
I don't know how to answer that because, the first one is phase one, and we don't even know if we're going to keep the sites there and move families one at a, do emptying of some units that happen naturally, rebuild and move in, or if we're gonna buy property somewhere else, and that hasn't been determined yet. So I need to get through.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I'm just curious. It
Yeah.
just seemed like it's a lot of people to try to.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of thought that goes into that, because there's a ton of regulations around how that is handled, so, and on top of it, we have a lot of folks in all of our properties that having to move out and move back in will be traumatic. So we want to make that as smooth as possible. And so the commissioners and I push it back on our project team. We want to reduce the trauma of folks of having to move out and move back in. However that ends up working, we want it to be smooth. If it could be one move, from a building to a new building, I think that would be perfect. Because we take care of that move. We take care of all the moves, but even so, moving is traumatic.
I do have a comment. One of the things that I do in the wintertime is I'm a volunteer for Safe Harbor.
Mhm.
And that's been an eye-opener as well as we have a need for it. What was really disheartening for me is the fact that there was a family with a couple little boys who was over at Safe Harbor, and I was there at the opening of Safe Harbor for this past season, was in early November, and they were there. When I went back for my shift in February, they were still there. They were still on the waiting list to get into, into HUD housing. And they promised me they were next on the list. I hope they got in, but what really bothers me, and I understand your position, this is, there's a need to get people in now to it, so it's hard for me to envision moving people out and then rehabbing places and having more people that, still have a need for housing. I don't know how you're gonna manage all that. I mean, that's.
There's actually professionals that manage that transition because of the work of RAD since 2012, and so they've gotten rather proficient with that.
I'm just
And our
sad
house-
to see that somebody was,
Yeah.
this particular winter was out on the street basically for 4 months before getting into.
But we've been 100% full in our general population site, which is our family. We have 48 units. And a situation where there's 2 adults and 2 children would be at minimum a 2-bedroom, most likely a 3. Some of the most difficult openings to get. Once people get in that, it's usually, they're there. So if we could build more units, that would be a boon. But I'm not sure that'll shake out that we can. So, but yeah, the need is there. The need is there, definitely.
Clinton, when you took in, I remember a year ago when you were here, you said about changing all those apartments and what it was gonna cost. Is this coming under the RAD program now?
As I began tonight, the RAD program allows us to leverage these federal properties. So we will be able to get the 9% tax credits, and as you know, they work by being resold, and we get the profit from that to be able to build with, along with financing that will come through different financial vehicles from different financial institutions. And those will be backed by the guaranteed rent. The amount of rent HUD will pay project-based vouchers is much greater than the amount of operational subsidy they currently pay per unit. The rent doesn't change for the resident, but the amount of rent that is available and that can be banked on coming is contractually written into it, that we can then use that as leveraging tools to financial institutions. So it's going to be through several different financial vehicles and credits and other HUD grant programs that are available. So it's going to be a major mix. I'm kind of hemming and hawing because it seems like every day emails with my project team as HUD changes some of the regulations are like saying, well, now it looks like we can use Section 18, on this, and that'll allow us to do this. And now we can use 202, and this will, and so it won't be solid until we make the final presentation to HUD, and then really final when we sign it all at the bank.
Did all these, last year when you said these projects were gonna be done, were any of them done then, or did we just go on hold?
We, once we got accepted into HUD, into RAD, which went a lot faster than anticipated.
How long ago was that?
Well, in March, the field office director called and said, I want you to look into RAD. That's where everything is moving, and I want my PHAs to move into it. So we began looking into it, and we brought on board EJP somewhere around the end of April, early May. We prepared a letter to send to HUD informing them we were interested in participating. And that went out in June. On July 3rd, I received a notification from HUD that we would be published in federal publications on July 5th. And once that happens, then we had 90 days in which to submit our application. We submitted our application, and within 40 days, we received what's called our CHAP, which is our commitment letter from HUD. So beginning in March, we went from where we were focused on to moving forward with the RAD program. We are continuing, we have major repairs that we continue to do, and the way we look at it is what buildings are going to be modified, renovated, redeveloped first. So we know the houses, and we keep them operating, but we're not sinking a tremendous amount of funding into it. We'll replace furnaces, we'll replace water heaters, we'll replace roofs, things that are health and safety, they'll all be taken care of. Greatest amount of funding ends up going to Century Terrace, because it's like the last. You know, it's probably about 8 to 10 years out from now. So we have to continue with public housing funding to support that building and keep it viable, and meet health and safety issues around that. And for that building, we have a roof that is about 8 years beyond its life expectancy. And so Bob's Roofing is patching here, patching there, because we've had leaks right into units on the 5th floor. So we're keeping it going that way. The cost of a new roof is beyond what we have in funding right now, but we keep it going. You know, the boiler goes out for hot water, it's going to get replaced. Elevators are serviced and maintained. You know, all the basic services of the building are being maintained with a viewpoint, and we've got 8 to 10 years before that is fully addressed. Does that help?
Okay, so I was in there one day a while back, and I noticed from when I used to be on patrol and go in there, and a lot of the carpeting is shot. Has that ever been replaced?
The carpeting was replaced about 5 years ago
Okay.
at a cost of nearly $15,000, $16,000. And so we have to keep in mind, do we want to spend the money on carpeting or keep a supply of refrigerators and stoves available, because they continually break down, you know, for us, and watch that out. We may replace in sections, but to recarpet the whole building, I don't anticipate that happening. You know, we'll repair and replace in sections, but not redo the entire building like we did.
No, last year, a couple of years ago, you told me if you ever file a complaint with the police, you have to have 5 of them, and I did all that last year. If you remember the one unit on 12th Street where you sent me a letter, and a gentleman down the road sent a letter with pictures, and things got done after that. Dave Bachman came up with a crew and cleaned out the place. We're starting to build up the junk again. What are we gonna do about it?
I need to go through that same process as before. You know, we provide notices to that resident to notify what can and can't be done. We're on that resident continually. You know, there's.
I mean, I was told that the guy's a veteran, they don't wanna kick him out, or can't kick him out or something. I'm not trying to get the man kicked out. What I'm trying to do is find out what we can do to change this, because he's out on the street every day yelling and screaming at cars.
Salute.
And saluting everybody. And, you know, I think somebody's gotta do something to help this gentleman out.
I cannot say a whole lot because of privacy law.
But I understand that.
Okay, so,
But I'm just bringing it to your attention.
yeah.
I'm sure you know that.
Yeah, we're aware of that situation, and
And now they're gonna be tearing up the street up in front of that, so you'll be outside every day yelling at the workers that are working out there. And the gentleman next door is the man I filed the complaints on, with the radio blowing that all the neighbors in the whole neighborhood are calling me.
Yeah.
So, you know, if something ain't done, then I'm gonna file a suit against the city.
You know,
Well,
we have constraints that we have of what we can and cannot do, okay? And we take action as, based on information we receive and based on requests, you know, that we receive.
Well, I'll come over and see you.
I cannot give you any details, you know, about that. You know, we've worked things out before, you know, with them, and we'll have to work things out, you know, again.
Any other
Tell you
questions?
that,
I have more.
I will tell you that when I discussed it with two HUD representatives that were with me, I said, fair housing will step in when necessary, so.
I have a question. I'd like an opinion from Mr. Taylor, if you care to offer one. At what point does the property where Century's Terrace sits become, where we can take a look at it and say, this is a really valuable piece of property? It would be more cost-effective if they sold it and built a new building elsewhere. I mean, I would think that we want to weigh those options, even though this is HUD, I understand that, but at some point, it would make sense to me if the property was deemed really valuable where you could put something else there, that this would be a
I
way to
don't
build.
disagree, but that's not, that decision isn't made by the city, it's
I
through the
know, but I'd
Housing
like your
Commission.
opinion. I mean,
And Clinton and I have had a discussion about that, and he knows my thoughts on it, but it's his decision to make.
Actually, it's HUD's decision.
right.
Yeah,
but-
we have to present a plan to HUD. And if the sale point happens, HUD will ensure that the receipt is at accurate appraisal and stuff. So, I mean, they're gonna wanna get their money, you know, for that.
Well, everybody always wants to get their money.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
that's-
I don't think there's any opposition with that, but when it comes to the housing commissioners and the board of directors, myself, the great concern, well, I'm sure you'll be hearing from residents who watch the videotape, because I just said that. So, you know, you have constituents who do not want that to happen. So, that is gonna need to be addressed, you know, and that's, won't happen until we start moving that phase and begin the public meetings with the residents of the building and such. Ultimately, though, HUD will say, you need to sell it and rebuild, or you move them all out and tear it down and rebuild it. You know, the decision will come in that direction of approval. We'll come up with a plan for it, but it makes sense to us in many ways, you know, to
Okay.
do that.
Any other questions? Thank you. We do appreciate your time.
I do want to report one last thing. I sent to Thad earlier today. We did receive a response and directive from the field office as to the city inspection fees. And they continue as, you can inspect, I cannot pay, so.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Next, introduction to the fiscal year 2019-20 budget. Yay! Administration has prepared a proposed budget for 2019-2020 fiscal year budget. The finance director will give a brief introduction of the city manager's budget recommendations to city council and to the community. The public hearing to review these budget recommendations and receive public input has been scheduled for Tuesday, April 16th. Various work sessions have been established. A regular work session on April 9th, followed by a regular meeting on April 16th, April 23rd, and April 30th, 2019. No action required. Mr. Bradford.
Just wanted to start off with a couple of comments. Number one, the budget is balanced, and that was one of the objectives that council directed staff to achieve. There were other objectives that I want to mention. As usual in our process, the department directors do provide input on the budget process. They do that in the past, they'll do it in the future. So that was one of the things that council wanted to make sure happened. Council wanted money for streets. We're going to have over $3 million worth in street projects if we get them all completed in this coming budget. There's $20,000 budgeted for economic development with the Manistee Area Chamber of Commerce. And finally, the parks budget should provide for some improvements at Veterans Memorial Park. You know, I want to thank our department directors for doing a great job on the budget. When they submitted their budgets to Ed and he put it together, we were just about less than $80,000 out of being balanced, which is really good. And we had 2 days scheduled to finalize the budget to get it balanced, and we were done in less than a day. So everybody chipped in and made some serious considerations and took things out of the budget that they really wanted, but we couldn't accommodate. But we do have a balanced budget. We have a lot of money for roads. We have economic development. We got some money for possible improvements at Veterans Park. So all the objectives that were voiced by council were met. And at that, I'll turn it over to Ed to let him go through the entire document, or the highlights of the entire document.
Thank you. Everybody should have received their budget document last week, and hopefully have had a chance to kind of thumb through it. The purpose of tonight is to kind of go through a high-level overview of the different budgets and the budget in general, and then we'll have further discussion at the work sessions and at the public hearing. My number one goal tonight, though, is that this big, beautiful picture of a summer scene at the beach gets rid of all this wet, snowy, white stuff we've been having, because it's time for the sun. I just want to go over some of the whole citywide budget highlights. And we don't often look at the whole, we kind of compartmentalize budgets, but this just kind of gives us a big picture. So as Thad mentioned, the general fund budget is balanced and does not use on any fund reserves. Our property tax revenue increased about 1.6% this year, which doesn't seem like a lot, but compared to the negative amounts we've had in past years and the single digits, that's a nice increase for us. So part of that was driven by the fact that the inflation factor was 2.1%. It provides for staff wage increases and maintains our benefit levels, which is nice to be able to do for the employees. The budget does reduce staffing by one full-time equivalent, and that's because we are going to continue to contract planning and zoning with the county. So after Denise retired, we did not replace that position. As Thad mentioned, we're also contracting economic development services with the Manistee Chamber of Commerce. We were able to maintain our scheduled 3.5% water and sewer rate increase, which was recommended per the rate study, and I'll have more to say on that when we get to the water section. Over the next couple of fiscal years, we anticipate about $21 million in utility construction. That's a huge number for the city, but we've been gearing up for that, and we're arranging the financing, and Sean and Jeff are working on the design and the plans, and there's still a lot of things that have to come together, but that's where we're headed. The refuse fund has finally stabilized. We're only suggesting a 4.2% rate increase this year. The last couple of years, we've had double-digit rate increases, so that's a positive development. This budget funds about $775,000 in street improvements. The current fiscal year 2019, based on projections, has over $3 million. A lot of that's timing based. It just depends on when those actually get done. So there's a lot of street work. We have some more detail on that. And then we've reduced the supplemental funding for the Ramsdale Theater this year slightly. Again, talking about overall budget, the total budget this year is $24 million. That's an increase of about $7 million over last year, and is quite a bit higher than our typical standard overall city budget of around $14 million. And that's all directly tied to capital projects that we're having to do. And again, primarily water and sewer. If you look at the graphs there, the top one, you can kind of see the city budget by area. The general fund's about 26%, and the water and sewer this year is about 53%. Again, based primarily on higher capital projects. And down below, if you look at the types of expense, operating expense is about 56% of the budget, and debt service is about 10%, and capital outlay this year, because it's so high, is about 34%. Focusing on the general fund, we mentioned that the general fund budget is balanced at about 6.35 million. That's an increase of only 1.2% over last year's budget, or about $76,000. We didn't use no fund reserves, and if you look at the chart there, you can see the green bars, well, maybe they're orange, I'm not good with the colors. The bars are at about 20%, which is close to our target of our fund balance. The line shows what our fund balance has been over time. And in the past couple of years, we've had a pretty healthy increase in our fund balance based on the excess personal property tax reimbursement that we've received from the state. We're anticipating that's going to go down a little bit this year, and then the budget calls for it to be flat. But you can still see it's at a historically healthy level. Some key points in the general fund. Our revenue growth finally is starting to recover. The tax base and the taxable values are starting to tick up. Our revenue sharing is projected to go up a little bit. So those are all good, because we've had a long period where we've seen reductions or flat. However, the taxable value growth that we experienced this year was less than inflation and muted by the tax capture. So the point there is some of this growth is in brownfield districts or downtown development authority districts where the city itself doesn't necessarily directly benefit by increased tax revenue. Of course, it benefits by the redevelopment of properties in that way, but that doesn't flow to our bottom line. Mentioned the staffing is down 1 FTE due to outsourcing in the general fund. We have a little bit of uncertainty in the budget based on the outcome of a police arbitration. We had the hearing for that a few weeks ago, and we're expecting a ruling by late June, maybe early July. Depending on where that is, that could impact the budget somewhat, although we are optimistic that it'll be favorable for the city. I did want to point out that we weren't able to fund all the priorities in the general fund. Thad mentioned that it came in about $80,000 in the deficit when we first submitted all of our departmental budgets. And a couple of things that didn't get included in the budget was we had hoped to fund a part-time blight enforcement person. That was removed and didn't make it in the final cut. The fire department was looking to update some outdated rescue life vests. They'll probably end up pursuing that through a revenue sharing grant at some point. For the last couple of years, Chief Kozel has wanted to go through a police accreditation process. That's about $8,000 to $10,000. And we weren't able to make it into the budget this year, but we're going to keep working towards getting that because we think that's valuable for the city to have that. We didn't have any money available for the waterway grant match to do the 5 remaining docks that aren't going to be rebuilt at by the insurance proceeds. Turns out that we won't be able to do that for another year anyway, so that isn't quite as a big deal. And then I do want to talk a little bit about riverbank erosion. With the high water levels and the SAISH damage and some of the winds and waves that we've had, we're having erosion down by the boat launch and by the overlook there on First Street that's going to have to be addressed. And Jeff and Sean can provide more details on that. It's going to be a rather expensive project. It's one of those things that you have fund balance for, and it's probably may even need to be dealt with yet this fiscal year, depending on what the engineers come back with. But that could approach $100,000 plus to do that. Right now, Jeff and Sean are looking at past wave studies, trying to see if maybe we can get the Corps of Engineers to possibly pay for some of that and maybe do something temporary. But that's something that is not built into the budget, and we'll have to take a look at as more details emerge. Some other points on the general fund revenue. I mentioned it's up about 1.2%. Our tax revenue was up. However, we bundled that with our payment in lieu of tax revenue, and those showed some declines because we're phasing some of those out in accordance with the agreements we have for utilities with Filer Township and with Manistee Township. So overall, that line item was fairly flat. Good news is our state revenue is up, and that's primarily from revenue sharing by about 3.5%. It could be even be a little bit more than that, depending again on how they're gonna handle those excess personal property tax reimbursements. That is a little bit of an area of uncertainty in the budget because the state just has not provided very good guidance on what those are gonna look like. Our sales and fees revenue was down by about 6%, and that's primarily due to transport revenue. Part of that is because council made a policy decision to do away with soft billing, and also our mix of runs in terms of number of runs and what types of services are being billed had a little bit lesser revenue. So the third-party billing agent, Acumen, provided us an estimate which showed it was gonna be lower. That was offset by some increases as well in that group of accounts. Our interfund revenue is up about 5%. That tracks very closely with our cost of labor goes up because it's basically reimbursements that are paid to the general fund for labor and equipment. And also we're phasing in to try to get to 100% reimbursement in the refuse fund. We're gonna be at 85% this year. And then our other revenue is up just slightly. This pie chart breaks down what the general fund revenue is. Again, tax revenue is at 54%. When I first started with the city, that was almost 2/3. So you can see that as that's gone down, we've had to make that up. And state revenue was also a much higher percentage of the budget. So we've worked to put some things in place to make sure we're sustainable. And then our general fund expenses. And in the general fund, you have a number of different departments. Basically, the three biggest are DPW and Parks, Police, and Fire. And those comprise about over 60% of the budget. We've grouped them a little bit differently here. So administration includes the manager, the finance and clerk departments, things like that. You can just kind of gives you an idea of where the money in the general fund gets spent. Debt is surprisingly low at 6%, and part of that's going to go away when the DDA debt is off at the end of this fiscal year. That's a pass-through anyway. We get reimbursed for that. So it's a lot lower than maybe some people might expect. Downtown Development Authority. As everybody knows, they capture taxes in our downtown district. As it stands right now, that will sunset after our bond issue expires in fiscal year 2020, unless there's action taken to renew that plan. And currently, the DDA has been working on updating their TIF and development plan. City administration has been reviewing that, providing feedback, and working towards getting that in front of council at some point. The DDA budget, we had hoped to have it included with the city's budget. In a future year, it will be. It should be available this week, though, so it'll be able to be discussed as part of the regular budget process and discussion. We just couldn't quite get it worked in this year, so next year we will make sure it's worked in. And just as I mentioned, council must approve the DDA budget. If you look at the pie chart on the right, it gives you an estimate of which taxes the DDA captures. So the biggest piece of that, about 58%, is city operating tax, about $142,000. And then the county operating tax is about 18% or $43,000. Then you've got the college, all the other county voted like Dial-A-Ride and Council on Aging, those types of things, and then the city refuse fund. So it just gives you an idea of where they get their tax increment financing revenues. Water and sewer overview. Budget this year for operations, debt service, and capital outlay is about $13 million. That's significantly higher than what our typical budget is because of the projects. We did one significant presentation thing differently this year. We used to have 4 or 5 departments in the water and sewer fund, and we've combined those basically into 3, well, at 4 now. But the biggest thing is we have a water department and a sewer department, and we also break out water debt service, sewer debt service separately, and then water capital outlay and sewer capital outlay. And the reason for that is we're going to be entering into some 40-year financing through rural development. They require that it's broken out that way. We just bit the bullet and decided to do it like that. That is a little bit competing with some of our revenue bond covenants, which say we have to operate the system as a combined water sewer entity. So we're trying to do both. Comply with rural development requirements, comply with our bond covenants, and by merging them in the budget, it'll make it a little bit easier to break that out when we have to report to them. We're doing a 3.5% proposed rate increase, and if you use 6,000 gallons of water a month, that'll be about $3 a month increase on your bill. Actually, we've always used that 6,000 gallon number, and I think Sean, the number that's closer is probably like 4,500 gallons is what a typical user does, so, the typical user is probably gonna be even less than that. The budget includes about 8.5 million in capital outlay and includes rural development, low-interest financing. Key points on the water and sewer. We have to implement the wet weather corrective action program, as Sean has been letting us know each meeting. Phase 1 of that will be lining and some storm sewer corrections, and phase 2 will be conveyance and storage down by the plant. So that's a big key thing. That's the thing that's gonna cost, around $20 million to do for both phases. We're gonna continue to implement agreements with Manistee and Filer Township. We'll be negotiating and hopefully finalizing the sewer agreement with Manistee Township. We made some good progress on that this month. And then implementing asset management software that's an outflow of the SAW grant. The vendor is called Lucidity, but that'll help the public works and the water and sewer utility to manage their assets, generate work orders, track things, and report at a much higher level than they've been able to do. And it implements with all the work that we've done on the GIS system. Water and sewer capital outlay, I just wanted to point this graph out. You see that huge spike coming up. Well, that's the wet weather corrective action program. But it's a little bit deceiving because that line, the first line there is $2 million worth of capital outlay. And you can see we've been in that $1 million range, $500,000 range, $700,000 range a year. We just have this big spike that we're gonna fund through the low interest financing. But I just thought it was kind of an informative graph to show you. Streets overview. The budget includes a 4-year transportation improvement plan, the current fiscal year as well as 3 years out. What we found is trying to project out more than 3 years is kind of a fool's errand because there's just too many moving pieces and too many variables to try to do it with any degree of accuracy. Scaled that back the last couple of years. We're seeing an increase in state funding per the previous road package that was passed. Obviously, that's kind of all up in the air in the upcoming budget because the governor has said she wants to raise a whole lot more money for roads, and the legislature hasn't totally bought into that yet. So stay tuned to where that ends up because there's going to be something different almost assuredly than what we've got now, and it will be more than likely more, but we just don't know what form and what the timing of that's going to be. The budget for this proposed fiscal year 2020 includes about a little over a mile of street work, 16 blocks, primarily local streets. As I mentioned, there's about almost $800,000 of budgeted investment. And then supplemental funding to the streets would be this year, the general fund sending $70,000, capital improvement fund $80,000, and the major street fund is sending $100,000 to the local street fund. These charts are in the budget, but they show where we're at, the condition of our streets in 2018 after the latest PACER rating that Jeff's crew does. And you can see all streets good, that's about 42%, and fair is about 14%. So 56, almost 60% of our streets overall are good and fair. Obviously, there's differences between local and major. The major street network is in better shape. But I think the other chart, which is a new one we put in this year, which shows the average PACER rating for all of our roads has gone up over the past 10 years from 4.3 to 5.5. That's pretty significant, really, especially considering that the enhanced state funding for streets really only kicked in the last few years. So the prioritization and the systematic management of our street network and the scientific use of asset management principles has really helped the city streets. Our transportation improvement plan, again, it's 4 years, the current proposed budget, and then 3 out years. Over that 4-year period, it anticipates about $4.7 million of investment, $1.8 million in local, $2.9 in major. We've got about 3.4 miles of streets or 54 blocks into that. And then you can see the length of streets there, about 1.82 miles of local and 1.59 in major. There is significant leverage and significant grant funding built into the assumptions that go into this transportation improvement plan. And if some of those don't pan out, then this will change, obviously. But there's, for example, we're assuming that MDOT is going to be receptive to resurfacing Memorial Drive and Fifth Avenue as part of a large detour that they're going to have when they do work on the US 31 bridge. So that's built in as an assumption. We've assumed that we're going to get 2 Category B grants from MDOT. we only get one of those, then we scale things back. But we have to have a starting point to build in those assumptions. We're pretty sure we're gonna get the one category B grant. The other thing to point out is in fiscal year 2019, in conjunction with the wet weather corrective action program, we're gonna be doing almost $3 million worth of street investment. A lot of that's being funded by water and sewer because it's water and sewer stuff that's tearing up the streets, but it's still a significant amount. This map is in your budget and shows by year the work that's planning to be done. And you can see 2019 fiscal year or construction year, in black there's a lot of that being done on the north side. Again, that's to correct some storm sewer and some stuff to make the flows less at the plant. But you can see there's a lot of work scheduled that's kind of scattered out throughout the town over those years. And in your budget, there's more details of which segments are being proposed and by what year and the length and estimated costs. Moving on to the refuse fund. I mentioned earlier in my comments that the refuse fund has finally started to stabilize. Just for a little bit of history, you recall that chart there that shows the fund balance. We had a pretty high refuse fund balance, and we decided to work that down to a more reasonable level over time. So the combination of lower taxable value and smaller or no rate increases allowed us to do that. And then we started to, because we have not raised the millage and our tax base has still been pretty flat, we've had to raise the monthly user charge. But we're to the point now where we've flattened that out and actually may start to increase that a little bit. So depending on what tax base does in future years, we might be able to adjust those rates down even more. But as I mentioned, we only have a 4.2% rate increase this year, which is pretty much in line with what the contract calls for increases on its different services. The other thing that's driven the cost a little bit is our recycling costs. And there's some challenges there, but we also are exploring some opportunities where we might be able to offload some of those costs and maybe relocate the recycling center. So that's being discussed right now. The other thing I mentioned earlier is right now the refuse fund is only, in this budget, going to reimburse about 85% of general fund expenses for labor and equipment for different services that it provides. We've been increasing that slowly over a few budget cycles, and eventually we'll get up to 100%, but we didn't want to do it all at once because that would make for larger rate increases. If you look at the chart for sources of revenue, taxes are about 33%, user fees are at about 63%. At one point that was almost 50-50. So that's changed a lot, and again, it's because our tax base had that decline after the Great Recession, and we had to make it up with user fees. And we've not adjusted the millage rate, which in the refuse fund we can do because it's a separate statutory millage and we're not levying the max. I don't know what the right mix there is. Some people look at refuse as a service, some look at it as a something that should be funded by taxes. So it just depends on your perception, I guess, but that's where we're at today. Municipal Marina, this is the one city enterprise that's got the most challenges in my view. The operations are still struggling a little bit to generate enough income. We're hopeful that when we get our damaged docks replaced this spring, that once that word gets out, we've got nice new docks, we've got a great new facility, maybe we'll generate a little more boater traffic. We did get some more seasonal slips, which might help to increase the revenue there. Obviously, there's a lot of things that we can't control. The weather, the gas prices, how good the fishing is. Those are three big variables that are out of our control. This budget continues to assume a $65,000 support for the marina from the Capital Improvement Fund, primarily to service the debt at the building. And this budget, again, is extremely tight with very little cushion. So depending on what happens, there are adjustments down the road. The boat launch, on the contrast to the marina, is very self-sufficient. It generates money. It at one point had built up enough money to actually do a pretty major repair at the Arthur Street boat launch without having to take on any debt or borrow any money from the general fund. It too is vulnerable to downturn in fishing conditions, although last year was a pretty good year, and I think it kind of surprised some people, so hopefully we'll have another good year this year. The auto attendant, which has replaced the staffing at the boat launch, that's probably been there for 7 years now, maybe. At some point, it's going to have to be replaced. We have it penciled in, but as long as it's still continuing to work and not causing us too much difficulty, we'll just keep extending its life out. These charts on the boat launch just kind of give you an idea of where the revenue comes in, and obviously August is the biggest month for the boat launch. And our yearly sales are fairly flat and fairly consistent. The big spike or decrease there in 2012 was when we had First Street torn up. So it did impact traffic a little bit. But those nice even revenues and a cost base that doesn't really get impacted by inflation is what allows us to make some money down there and set some aside for future improvements. The Capital Improvement Fund, the revenue from that comes from the 4% oil and gas spending rule calculation that we do each year. This year it's going to be around $400,000, it's a little bit more than that, and that's also roughly what we have budgeted for expense. We have a mixture of previously committed projects and new projects in the Capital Improvement Fund. The two new projects that are slated are to take care of the 50-year-old city garage electrical service generator, repurpose the generator that's there over to one of the wells, and a few things like that, clean up a few circuits. And then two servers, one of which is a primary application server and one is a police video server, both of which are definitely needing replacement. That budget includes about $150,000 towards streets. That's the debt portion plus the current allocation to the Transportation Improvement Plan. So this chart kind of breaks that down. You can see we've got about $246,000 of committed expenses, previously committed. Part of that is for the Ramsdale HVAC system, so paying off that note. We've got the $65,000 for the marina debt support, and then about $72,000 for First Street. So the Capital Improvement Fund is paying off that on a debt standpoint for streets. And then for the current year allocations, about $90,000 in those two new projects I mentioned, and then $80,000 for local street support. So that's a total of about 416. And you can see the chart on the right just shows the categories. So streets are about 36%, buildings 43%, marina 16%, and equipment 5%. Last year buildings would have been a lot less. It's up this year because of the city garage project. Oil and gas fund, just kind of a reminder that, it accumulates the royalties from the wells on the north side, and the charter does protect those accumulated royalties. Oil and gas production, thankfully, is continuing. The facility was shut down for a while, over a year ago, but it has started back up, and the royalties are coming in. We're projecting accumulated royalties to be about $7.6 million, so that would be the protected balance. And then, assuming the market doesn't tank, the value of the fund would be projected to be a little over $10 million. And that does fluctuate depending on the timing and when you measure it, but over the long term, it tends to be growing. Motor pool. There were a few changes we made in the motor pool budget this year, both from an analytical standpoint and from a presentation standpoint. As you all know, it funds the replacement of our fleet equipment and receives rents from both water and sewer and from the general fund. We gave a presentation a little over a year ago about the motor pool and how we're working towards trying to make it be a little bit more self-sufficient. It was never intended to be totally self-sufficient, but we've refined how we calculate the contributions from the different departments. And so overall, the rental payments going into the motor pool went up somewhat this year, but you'll notice in the budget that they've gotten reallocated between departments on a more equitable basis based on kind of the refinements in that formula. So for instance, Parks contribution will be down from what it was, whereas the DPW contribution is going to be quite a bit higher. We're not there yet where we're funding not only the costs in the out years, but any shortage, but we're working towards that, and over time, this will become more sustainable. The other thing we're doing is we used to show just the cash basis of the equipment purchases. So if I was financing something, I was only showing the first year purchase, even though we identified how much it was. What we've done now is show the total purchase cost and the expenditures and any financing coming in as a cash flow. So it just gives a little bit clearer picture of what is actually going to be spent in the motor pool. You can see this year we've got six pieces of equipment scheduled for replacement: a plow truck, a dump pickup, a lease on a skid steer loader because that renews every year, another police car, That police car is currently budgeted in this fiscal year, but we don't think it's gonna get bought because there's too much of a lead time, so we'll just put it in the next year's budget. It's more of just a timing thing. A pickup truck and then a mower, so total cost of those new pieces or new replacement pieces of equipment, because we're not expanding the fleet, is about $332,000. Our total budgeted expense though is about $659 because we do have previous debt payments as well that we're paying on. Again, you'll notice a different presentation, and as I mentioned, we're implementing a different funding formula. Ramsdale Theater, budget assumes that the RRCA can continue to operate and manage the Ramsdale. They did lower the requested allocation from $55,000 to $50,000, and that's been the target for the last several years, is to get down to that $50,000 level. By way of information, that $50,000 pretty much funds repairs, maintenance, and utilities in that building. It's not funding any operations or programming or anything else. So I think the RRCA board is kind of the opinion that's probably kind of a floor that they probably won't be reducing that allocation in future years. They are doing well in fundraising, but they've also made a significant investment in the facility in fiscal year 19, including they were able to get a donation to buy a new piano, which they needed. They were able to renovate one of the rooms downstairs. It's now an escape room, generated over $3,500 over spring break in revenue. So that's really positive. That's going to be an ongoing source of revenue. They're funding a renovation of the walls in Hardy Hall so it can serve as a better function. So a lot of the money that the RRCA is generating is going right back into the building which the city owns. And you can see that chart on the top right kind of shows the different categories of funding that the city has provided between operating, capital projects, and debt service. The operating peaked at $107,000 back in fiscal year 2014, and then it's projected to be $50,000 this year. So they've reduced that by over 50%. So just to kind of summarize, we feel like the budget addresses the council priorities as they laid out back in December. Invest significantly in our utility infrastructure, both at the plant and in the streets in terms of lining and the storage basin. We propose just a modest utility rate increase to do that, and the reason we're able to do that is twofold. One is we have some debt that's falling off, and two, we're hopeful to get the 40-year low-interest loans from rural development. So it's good timing, but it also insulates the ratepayers from having to have a large increase. The refuse fund has been stabilized at last, and hopefully we can continue that moving forward. We're rehabilitating over a mile of streets, but in the tip, we're doing multiple miles over the 5-year period. And again, we've reduced the head count by 1 FTE and replaced that through outsourcing. So that's all I have for my comments. I don't know if there's any questions. We're going to be having a work session next week after our work session, and then the next one will have a public hearing and potential.
I was going to suggest that on April 9th, that we all have a chance to review this budget, write down our questions, and we'll get right into it on April 9th.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Concerns and comments. Citizens' comments. This is a portion for citizens to comment on municipal services, activities, or area of city involvement. Citizens in attendance shall be recognized by the mayor for comment. This is not a question and answer period. We'll limit your comments to 5 minutes. Letters submitted to council will not be read. Do we have any citizens' concerns or comments? Seeing none, we'll go right to staff.
Nothing at this time.
The attorney?
Mayor, just welcome, and I always appreciate the opportunity to sit in for Mr. Saylor, and I bring greetings from your sister city in Ludington. So.
We're all jealous of Mr. Saylor right now.
Yes, we are.
Mr. Bradford? Anything? How about Sean? You got anything you want to talk about?
Nothing, Your Honor.
On schedule, yes or no? For our sewer project?
Yes, for the design and the design, we're still working with the DEQ and the rural development.
Rick, water and sewer, do you have anything? Mr. McCool? Naturally.
Doesn't he say you just couldn't step over here?
I was trying, but he stuck his head up and was waving his hand at me, so.
So, as always, the Ashland from the News Advocate helps to write stories and get information out on things that are happening in the city. And so fresh off the press was the update on the marina construction. However, I have a new development that we were made aware of yesterday. Back in November, we applied for a joint permit application to the DEQ and the Corps of Engineer. The DEQ issued the permit exceptionally fast, and we received that right after the first of the year. The Corps of Engineers has had several follow-up questions, and we've been answering those over the first couple months of this year. And as of about 3 weeks ago, we were expecting them to issue the permit any day. Yesterday, we were informed that the Corps has decided that they need to the project application through the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, for their review because it's adjacent to the historic district in Manistee. They don't feel like there's anything necessary or anything that will come out of that review, but it takes time. So we've appealed that and pointed out that the dock pilings that we're removing and simply replacing at the same locations are 50, 60 years old, which from the historic perspective isn't significant, but they need to check that box. So we're hoping that they're able to expedite that and that the review process goes very quickly, but there is the potential that it could delay the start of construction. So we'll keep you informed as that develops. We did start receiving shop drawings from the contractor today. Weather's warming up, so the frost is coming out of the ground. Other than that permit hiccup, we should be in line. So,
Is the contractor still gonna be continuing with building the docks and doing all the work that they can? Again, I understood that they were gonna do most of that in shop, so that part is still continuing?
I would hope so. I would hope that they would continue progressing with all the work that they possibly could until that permit is issued, but they will not. I believe they would be able to remove the actual upper dock portions of it, but we won't be able to extract pile or drive new piles. So
Without the permit?
We've got a pre-construction meeting coming up pretty quick here, and we'll be able to discuss all that, and we'll be trying to track and push that SHPO review as much as we can.
And I'd just say to echo that, the shop drawings we're getting are along the lines of getting some of that work, done in advance. They'll be able to do anything except work below the ordinary high water mark, so they could mobilize, get some materials on site. There's a lot of things they still can do, but until we have to take a little longer.
Yeah, so we're not hitting the panic button, but just wanted to let you know there's a little fly in the ointment right now.
Little hiccup.
Yep.
Thank you. Public safety.
Nothing from public safety, thank you.
Okay, Lizette, Rising Tide.
Hi, everyone. I would just like to give you a little bit of updates on some of the things that we got going on. I'm sure you received the board governance survey as part of Project Rising Tide. If you haven't completed it, please, I would ask that you take a minute to do so. The limit date to complete this survey will be April 15th. And the whole idea of completing the survey is to help us tailor some of the content that we will be providing to the public boards as part of our initiative of, kind of working with the leadership in Manistee. The second thing is that I know most of you who went to the Economic Development Summit met Joe Borgstrom, the consultant that's working with us for economic development. He will be having an interaction in the next Downtown Development Authority meeting next week to talk about ideas, expectations, and some of the information that was shared through the Economic Development Summit a month ago. I just heard today from the Branding and Marketing Initiative as we try to work in kind of spreading a good positive message about Manistee beyond the community. And we're gonna have Ben Muldrow, our consultant, next Wednesday and Thursday, hosting focus group sessions, talking about the community, about their vision and the way that Manistee identifies themselves as far as, attracting more residents and people to feel welcome as they come into the community. The other thing is with the housing part of Project Rising Tide. Within the next few days, you probably will be hearing from Sarah Lucas. She is the contractor leading the housing initiative for Project Rising Tide. She'll be probably asking some of your time or a little bit of your insight as far as the housing issue and shortage in Manistee. Other than that, thank you.
Thank you for the update. Appreciate it. Mr. Gabowski.
Yeah, I think Thursday they're having a big meeting at the high school discussing the school buildings, and I think that'll be interest for some of the people that gonna pay more taxes, I'll bet. So I think that'd be interesting for people to go up there and attend that.
Mr. Szymanski.
Nothing at this time?
Mr. Cooper. 0. Mayor Pro Tem Beaton.
I have a list.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes.
Running over.
The first thing on my list, this is such a, wow, this is like, wow, Mr. Wilson is here. I want to know what's going on with the purchase of the Glick building. Did that go through?
All I know is it's still in process, and they're doing their due diligence and evaluating. That's the extent of my knowledge. But they are still moving forward.
Okay, because I haven't heard anything, so I was hoping that nothing had fallen apart on it.
Nothing to my knowledge. I reached out to a representative of the college that assured me that it was still in progress.
Okay. Next on my list, you had mentioned, I think at the last meeting that we had, I think you mentioned that we had 6 properties in the city that were gonna close by May 31st.
Correct.
Yeah, are we still on track with those, that you know of?
Yeah, we had a meeting last Friday afternoon with the 2 investors. They brought in various contractors and support personnel, and we had MEDC here. And I think Lizette and I represented the city, and we spent probably 4 hours with them. So they're moving forward. One property, it's my understanding, they've closed on and owned outright, and the other 5 properties, they'll be closing different times, but the last one, the end of May.
Great, that's good to hear. I know that I have sent you information from one of the residents in my district in regards to tree cutting over by Man-Made Lake.
Mhm.
And I'd like, if there's any way to stress, that city property, your citizens are not allowed, it's against the law or our ordinance to cut trees.
Well, I met with Detective Glass on Monday, gave him the information. He was gonna assign it to an officer to follow up on it. I had not had an opportunity since we talked on Monday to follow up with it.
Okay.
But knowing Detective Glass, it was assigned and in process.
I would like to suggest that we put some signs up that they can't do that.
Okay.
Because it seems to be, it's, every few years, we seem to have this problem in that same area, so.
And we did make a case, and we presented to the prosecutor a couple of years ago, and they declined to prosecute.
Okay, let's keep trying.
Yeah, we will. That's not gonna discourage us, but I just wanna let you know that we did get a prior complaint, we did investigate it, we put together a case and presented it to the prosecutor.
When they take down pine trees and you start to see erosion in the area, then that becomes a concern.
Sure.
So, that's the end of my list.
Okay.
Thank you. Aren't you gonna have some comments?
I thank everybody that came and showed up. A lot of people left already, but, gee, we're running over. I'd like to thank our attorney for being here, filling in for Mr. Saylor. I'm sure he's happy. Yeah. I have nothing else. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Susan will bring you back his bottles.
I have a motion, adjourn.
For making you show up here tonight.
Well, this is just payback. You had to